Last night was opening night for the 2024-2025 Edmonton Oilers, and to say the least, it did not get off to the most auspicious of starts.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, today's episode, we are going to talk about the Oilers' opening night 6-0 loss to the Winnipeg Jets. We are going to approach it from a few different angles. We're going to talk about the game itself tangibly. We are going to talk about some of the takeaways from that game. And then we're going to tie it all back in our final segment to some of the themes we talked about on yesterday's show. So, at the outset, it is important to say this because it is an essential component of bracing yourself as a sports fan. You need to have a response that is proportional to what's happened. I don't think anybody is panicking about one game. I don't think anyone is worried about one game. I don't think anyone is going to draw any major conclusions from one game. Remember, it is one singular game out of 82. The Oilers are going to play 81 more of these, no matter what. And then, if everything goes right, they're going to play something in the ballpark of 20 to 27, 28 more games after those initial next 81. So, tapering your expectations, understanding the context of these individual games, understanding the context of the plot line of a long season, it requires being able to take a step back. It requires taking a deep breath and getting an understanding of what's going on. One game is one game. Takeaways from opening night. Number one, the Oilers looked very, very clunky in transition. And what I mean by that is the passes were not very crisp. Players weren't able to receive the puck and continue their stride, receiving the pass in motion to maintain speed through the neutral zone. I think there was definitely a little bit of lethargy. There was a lethargic nature to the way the Oilers came out of the gate last night. And the first sequence that really sticks out in my mind is when Ekholm and Bouchard tried to go D to D at the point, and Bouchard received the pass in a half turn where he was perpendicular to the blue line, meaning his legs were over the blue line, splitting them. So he was standing laterally, his legs over the blue line, half his body in the neutral zone, half his body in the offensive zone. And because he was slow on his turn, he didn't get his stick exactly where it needed to be to receive the pass. The puck caromed off his stick, and Mark Scheifele of the Jets read the play well, jumped the pass, received that loose puck in the neutral zone, had a clear odd man rush. Bouchard, because he was lateral, had to turn his body fully to begin skating at full speed to chase down the play. And look, Skinner makes the save. It's not a big deal. The save happens. You're slow out of the gate the first period of the first game. That makes sense. But when your best players are making mistakes like that are focus-based and details-based, it's not great. And I'm not ready to have a stinging indictment of the preseason, of Chris Knobloch, of the preparation, but you don't want to see that. When your team's defined weakness on paper is its defense, and you are banking on Ekholm and Bouchard being your bell cows, doing a majority of the work, 26, 27 minutes a night for 82 games, and then the playoffs, you want them to get into good habits. And then number two, building off of that, and we were talking about transition, the Oilers did not do a great job in transition, especially on defense. And transition defense is very feel based. It is very instinctual. And what I mean by that is a lot of it comes down to split second decisions that every team, regardless, not just the Oilers, their defensive structure, it has defined rules. That is the way structures and systems in sports work. That if I am here on the ice and the other team is here with the puck, I need to do this. If I have the puck here, it needs to go here. That is the fundamental principle of structure, that the rules within said structure, you adhere to them to maintain structure so everybody plays better. Because hockey is so instinct based and so read based, when a defenseman steps up, so we'll take one of the Winnipeg goals, for example. Nurse steps up to try and force a turnover, I would say at the top of the circle on the left side. He steps up. He doesn't separate the puck carrier from the puck. The puck carrier is able to get the puck across the ice, and it sets up a 2-on-1. Emerson isn't really able to get over because he is shading towards the middle to play between two guys. So to properly illustrate it in your head, picture Nurse at the top of the left circle hitting someone along the boards. The Jets still have two people coming down, and Emerson is by himself in front. Emerson has to maintain a neutral posture between the two players crashing down on the net. That puck gets all the way across. Emerson can't get across, and Skinner can't get across. Because of that, it puts the goalie in an impossible position. So I don't want to do this on every episode for the entire season because I don't think going play by play of every goal and what goes wrong in it is particularly compelling or informative. You watch the game. For the most part, I'm going to assume that if you're taking the time out of your day to make Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day, it's because you want to know more. It's because you want more information. You watch the game already. So I'm assuming that if you're listening to today's show, you watched the game. You might have even ran back the highlights because you wanted to see what went wrong yourself. And the one last point I want to get in on this first segment before we move on. The Oilers had chances. A 6-0 score is a crooked number. You don't want to lose 6-0. It doesn't look good. I will say the Oilers had chances. You had a Zach Hyman post. Victor Arvidsson had a couple jam plays at the net front. McDavid and Draisaitl both had breakaways, respectively. The Oilers had chances in this game to change the direction of the game. And 95% of the time, when the final score is something like 6-0, that means one team didn't get the breaks, and then the game snowballed away from them. The Oilers had chances. And, if it's 3-1, you probably end up with a 5-3 or a 5-4 final score. If it's 4-2, you got a good chance of a 5-5 game. But because the Oilers couldn't get those bounces, you got to start cheating for offense. Your defensive structure becomes even more compromised as you're cheating for offense. And it creates a negative feedback cycle where because you're trying to create more offense, you're giving away more defensively. So on that note, we are going to take our first break of today's show. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the thematic takeaways from game number 1, the regular season, coming up next on Locked On Oilers. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. This week in the NFL, tonight, Thursday Night Football, we've got good old school NFC West 49ers at the Seahawks. 49ers, 3.5-point road favorites. Interesting game. Washington Commanders, Jaden Daniels, the belle of the ball in the football community right now, going to Baltimore to take on the two-time NFL MVP Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. The Commanders, 6.5-point road underdogs. My favorite game of the weekend, though, Kyler Murray and the Cardinals going up to Green Bay. The Cardinals, 4.5-point road favorites. And then Sunday Night Football, Joe Burrow and the Bengals going to MetLife Stadium to take on the New York Football Giants. The Giants, 3.5-point home underdogs. So if you want to get in on the action and spice up your NFL weekend, head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are walking through game number 1 of the Oilers 2024-2025 NHL season, which did not get off to a great start. And I want to emphasize this. One game is okay. If the Oilers are still looking this mediocre in transition and on defense a week or two from now, then we can start to have an honest conversation, word to Eric Bischoff. But right now, my main takeaway is that this group is going to need some time. We talked about this extensively on yesterday's show, the themes of that are going to define the season. I did an episode a few weeks ago about why the Oilers would probably get off to a slow start to start the season. When you have this much roster turnover in a singular offseason where you are replacing 2 defensemen, you're replacing 3 forwards, you are going to have some funkiness. You are going to have an adjustment period, specifically on defense. We talked a lot on the Wednesday edition of the show before the game, the idea of a binary choice of how long are the Oilers going to give Nurse and Emberson to figure it out versus how much time do they actually need to figure it out? Because I said this during the summer when that group, when those two were first put together and early training camp and reported as being what the presumptive starting pairs were at the start of training camp, I took a moment and I was really, I don't want to say confused, but I was a little hesitant to put Emberson with Nurse because of the player profiles. Both are kind of big, they're lumbering. Neither is particularly agile as a skater. Neither's like, cement feet, but neither guy is going to be confused for Cale Makar. If anything, you would have thought trying to break those guys up would be good to put more foot speed out there, to better distribute foot speed across the defense is what I will say. And going off of that, I do think it's a fair critique, and I had said this yesterday as well. I do think I would have liked to have seen more of a full lineup from the Oilers in the preseason because of the amount of turnover they had. And I understand the way preseason works now, where you want to give AHL guys a chance, you want to give your junior guys a chance before you send them back. But the Oilers not playing a full lineup a ton doesn't help. And look, I understand most teams don't do that and why teams do it this way. It's really a matter of the guys not wanting to play a lot of preseason games, not wanting to risk injury. I understand the reasons, but, and yes, big but, you need these guys to get reps. It is not a coincidence that Emberson and Nurse, who don't have a lot of familiarity with each other, were the Oilers' worst pair last night. They had 30% of the scoring chances. The Oilers had 6. The Jets had 14. 0 of the goals for. The Jets had 2. Oilers had 0. The Oilers had 20% of the expected goals for with Nurse and Emberson out there. They had 50% of the high danger chances, but it was 1-1. And then they had a 6.67 on ice save percentage. And you heard me hammer this drum all summer long if you're an everyday listener of Locked On Oilers. The best way to play defense in today's NHL is to play less overall defense. If you are in your own zone, and look, you heard me say it, it was 1-1. Nurse and Emberson only conceded 1 high danger chance against in their 12-ish minutes of ice time together. But because they were in their own zone so much, 14 scoring chances against. And look, 1 scoring chance per minute-ish is not a lot, but the volume of those chances at 5-on-5, it accumulates. It wears those guys down. It wears down Stuart Skinner. It wears down the forwards. And it's not a coincidence that the one forward line that was negative in possession, Draisaitl, Skinner, and Arvidsson, was the most commonly deployed line with Nurse and Emberson. And look, we're talking about 4 minutes for Draisaitl. We're talking, I want to say 3 minutes for Henrique. We're talking 2 minutes for McDavid, 2 minutes for Derek Ryan. The Oilers tried to evenly distribute the forward responsibility of protecting Nurse and Emerson, but it's a real difficult lineup decision if you're Edmonton, because you want to get you want to get Draisaitl's line and McDavid's line out there as much as you can, because those are the minutes where you're going to be able to pull away from most teams. You are going to be able to win those minutes, and that's enough. In the regular season, if you have 2 of your 4 lines going consistently, that is more than enough to be really good. The Oilers are going to win a bunch of games this year, but Draisaitl's line being negative in possession, playing with Nurse and Emerson, not great. And then McDavid's line, they gave back pretty much everything they were able to create. If I remember correctly off the top of my head, McDavid's line had 12 scoring chances. The Jets' opposition when he was out there had 11. And look, I am not asking Leon Draisaitl or Connor McDavid to play Sasha Barkov caliber defense. That's not going to happen, 1. And 2, it's a waste of their talent. Most nights they are going to generate so much offense and so many offensive chances. It's not really going to matter if they give it back defensively. But last night's kind of the perfect storm. You know, a quality opponent, strong goalie, and Connor Hellebuck, who made a handful of very nice saves, I should add. I know we're mostly giving the Oilers perspective here on Locked On Oilers, but you got to tip your cap when the other team's goalie makes plays, and Hellebuck did a really nice job of that and gave his team a chance to win. I will say, you probably would like to have Stuart Skinner make at least one difficult save in that game. And look, I know he makes the save on Scheifele on the breakaway, but that's the kind of game where you need someone to be a difference maker. And when that game starts to snowball and the score starts to get crooked, that's where you need your goalie to make a big save, just to give yourself a little bit of a kick in the butt. And again, I said it at the outset, I'll say it again. One game is not going to define this entire season. The opening game of the Oilers season is not going to define the entire year. I will say, and this will be the last point for the second segment, last night was the perfect storm if you are bearish on the Oilers. If you are skeptical or weary of some of the decisions they made, whether it be the players they brought in, who's playing with who, if you are skeptical of what the Oilers did, last night is credence to your position. They weren't great defensively. Their offense, in trying to create more offense, gave it back defensively. The goaltending was very mediocre to outright bad. And that's the perfect storm of everything going wrong. You know, Murphy's Law for the Oilers on opening night. We are going to take one final break. We come back. We are going to take one big collective deep breath. And I'm going to talk you off the ledge. Coming up next. If you're like me, you are chomping at the bit to get to your first NHL game of the season. And the only place I buy NHL tickets is through our friends at the Gametime app, with some of the best features in the ticket buying experience. My personal favorite feature, the seat view. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. If you're going to a hockey game, you want to know, am I going to be looking for the red light behind the goalie? Am I going to be looking to see the reaction of the player who shot the puck? Or am I going to see the puck hit the back of the net? Get that panoramic view and have an idea whether or not you are going to be able to jump up and go nuts, or if you're going to need to wait and see that red light go off. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And Gametime ticket coverage, where your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition as we are powering through our recap of opening night and talking big picture. We are talking narratives, and we are talking, of course, about the game itself. everything I just said at the end of the last segment is true. Last night was the Murphy's Law game for the Oilers. You had a chance to get back in that game. You have the post, you have the scoring chances get denied at the net front, and then Winnipeg gets a power play goal in there, which has been a real concern of theirs, that Winnipeg's power play just wasn't great last year, and they got that. They got a great Hellebuck performance. They got Kyle Connor extending the longest streak of goals on an opening night to 7. The Jets are not a bad hockey team. And this is a brief aside. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I do think it's interesting and something you should be worth. It's something you should hear. The Jets are a pretty talented hockey team. You know, you got Scheifele, you got Hellebuck, you got Josh Morrissey. Hellebuck won the Vezina last year. Josh Morrissey is a fringe Norris candidate. Scheifele can be a point per game player, even though he's pretty bad defensively. Kyle Connor, easy 30 goals. Nikolai Ehlers, one of the most underrated players in the entire NHL, one of the best transition players in the NHL from going defense to offense, skating with the puck. You have Rasmus Kapari, you have Alex Iafallo. They have a talented hockey team. You know, you have Nino Niederreiter, you have Morgan Barron. Adam Lowry is still a pretty solid depth forward. They still have pieces in the pipeline they can tap into, whether it's Brad Lambert, Vinny Heinola. They have options that they are going to be able to integrate over the course of the season. So don't jump off a cliff. Don't be too stressed. Yes, all of the Oilers' weaknesses that you may have felt they had coming into the season were on display last night. But it is a long season, and they are going to have opportunities. And I said this a few weeks ago. I said this on Wednesday's show. It's going to take some time for everything to get sorted out. You know, Dermott playing with Kulak, we thought it might have been Stetcher. Now we need to see how Dermott and Kulak were good. You know, they won the shot share battle. They won the expected goals. They played reasonably well enough. It was just the fact that in the instances the Jets had to capitalize on to score, they were able to put the puck in the net. The Oilers weren't. We talk about this all of the time. Hockey is an extremely high variance game. The lower seeded team, or I should say, the betting underdog, wins their playoff series the most in hockey of any of the 4 major North American sports, because hockey has a lot of variables within just a given play, let alone an entire game. All it takes is one puck going in for Edmonton and one puck not going in for Winnipeg, and then it's 3-1 as opposed to 4-0. And then the Oilers can start to get going a little bit. You know, when the Oilers get going downhill, when there's an ice tilt where it feels like they're in the offensive zone for a minute and a half every single time they have the puck, that's where they're at their best. You know, the Oilers, when they're down a goal, they turn it on into like a demon mode that very few teams can match the firepower for. And one last thing on this note before we wrap it up on today's show. Score impacts develop the game. And what I mean by score impacts, so if the game is 1-0, you're going to assume that the team that is trailing a goal is going to need to push more offensively to create a goal. They're going to be willing to concede a little more defensively to get to offense quickly. When that happens, the other team that is playing with the lead is going to recognize that, and they're going to take a little bit more of a defensive posture and then look to spring on the counterattack. Last night, the Jets won the game 6-0. The Oilers had more of the scoring chances and more of the expected goals. Those two things seem very incongruous at face value, but you need to understand how much the score of a game impacts the way the game is played. NHL coaches are very, very conservative defensively, especially with a lead. They would rather try and win the game 2-1 than win the game 6-5. Because of that, they are going to take fewer chances. They are going to dump the puck in more when they have the opportunity, instead of carrying the puck into the offensive zone with speed, trying to look to create more offense, because they know rush chances typically are a one and done in the offensive zone. It's going to enable the other team to go back the other way, and that's how you kind of get into that track meet style, which favors the way Edmonton wants to play. Instead, they're going to dump that puck in. They're going to cycle. They're going to forecheck, and they're going to try and wear the game away. They're going to salt the game away. You know, like if you're watching a football game and they got a lead late, they're going to run the ball. 2-3 times a series of downs to keep the clock running, where even if they're not really being aggressive to try and score a touchdown, they are doing a job of running that clock so the game can't be determined anymore. You run at that clock, you win the game. That's the goal. And the Jets were able to do that. They were able to keep building on their lead because the Oilers' mistakes were so explicit, so straightforward. And because of that, it makes the score what it was. The one last thing I want to get in on this episode before we wrap up for the day. It is a long season. The expectations could not be any higher. The Oilers are the betting favorite to win the Stanley Cup. When the expectations are this high and there is so much turnover, it is a complicated marriage of concepts. We were talking about how long is it going to take for Emerson and Nurse to gel, Dermott and Kulak, or Stetcher and Kulak? How long is it going to take for Skinner, Arvidsson, Draisaitl to click? It's probably going to be a few weeks. Don't be surprised if the Oilers don't get off to the best of starts. Now, I think we can all use our context clues and understand maybe that a 6-0 game on opening night is a little bit different than like a 4-3 overtime loss, but you get what I'm saying. At the very least, there are going to be some growing pains here. There are going to be some familiarity pains where until player X and player Y have a better understanding of how the other reads the game, it's going to be clunky. The passes aren't going to be as crisp. Guys aren't going to be in positions to receive passes to shoot on goal as much as they should be. But that is the magic of the long season. You have so much time to work this out. We might be looking at entirely different defensive pairs and forward lines in a few weeks because the Oilers have options. It is a luxury to have the depth they do, but they do need to be mindful of their weaknesses. They are not a great transition team as far as their defense, other than Bouchard and Ekholm. And what that does to offense reduces the amount of times you can go from defense to offense. The less offense you play, the more defense you play. That self-fulfilling cycle of struggling defensively, having to play more offense, it does wear away at you. I mean, it was ultimately what lost the Oilers the Stanley Cup final. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Before we get out of here, if you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, we're 10 subs away from 1,600. Let's crush that number going into next week. And last but not least, thanks for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. Now go check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey to become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steele and Flip. Find the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. I will talk to you guys tomorrow on Friday, where we're going to go into the weekend where the Oilers take on the Chicago Blackhawks on Hockey Night in Canada. I'll talk to you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers.